They said she was crazy for even trying. A 36-year-old waitress with calloused hands and discount store clothes, walking onto that stage like she belonged there. But when Jessica Thompson opened her mouth, the entire auditorium fell silent. What happened next proved that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. Jessica had been running on empty for longer than she cared to remember. Every morning at 4:30, her alarm would pierce through the darkness of their one-bedroom apartment in Cleveland, and she'd slip out of bed without waking her 10-year-old daughter Emma. The breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner meant serving coffee and eggs to construction workers and early commuters who barely looked up when she refilled their cups. Her hands moved automatically. Pour, serve, clear, repeat, while her mind counted the hours until her next job. By noon, she'd traded her diner uniform for cleaning supplies, spending her afternoons scrubbing office buildings downtown. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she vacuumed conference rooms where people made more in an hour than she earned in a week. She'd learned to be invisible in those spaces, moving efficiently around executives who talked through her like she was part of furniture. Evenings belonged to a grocery store, where she stocked shelves and ran registers until closing time. The automatic doors would slide shut behind the last customer, and Jessica would finally head home to find Emma asleep at their kitchen table. Homework spread around her like she'd been waiting up as long as she could manage. This was survival, not living. Jessica knew the difference, though she trained herself to stop thinking about it. Dreams were dangerous luxuries that single mothers working 3 jobs couldn't afford. Dreams made you forget to be grateful for what you had. Dreams made the gap between your reality and your possibilities feel like a canyon you'd never be able to cross. But Emma saw something her mother had forgotten existed. During the rare Sunday mornings when they had a few hours together, Emma would catch her mother humming while making pancakes. It wasn't casual humming. It was something that made their tiny kitchen feel like a concert hall. When Emma played her grandmother's old CDs, Jessica would unconsciously harmonize with voices that had filled stadiums. Her untrained voice somehow finding notes that made Emma's heart race with excitement. Jessica Thompson had once been a girl everyone expected to make it big. In high school, she was a voice that made people stop talking and start listening. Her music teacher, Mr. Davidson, had handed her college brochures senior year with scholarship applications already highlighted in yellow. He'd looked at her with the kind of certainty that makes teenagers believe anything is possible and said that voices like hers came along maybe once in a teacher's entire career. But Jessica's father lost his job right before graduation. Her mother's medical bills from a car accident ate through their savings like acid. College became a distant dream, while Jessica took double shifts at the local factory to help keep their house from foreclosure. The scholarship applications yellowed in her bedroom drawer, while she learned to measure her worth in overtime hours instead of standing ovations. When she met David during a rare night out with friends, his steady reliability felt like exactly what her unstable world needed. He worked at the auto plant, came home tired but consistent, and loved hearing her sing while she cooked dinner. They married quickly, and when Emma arrived, Jessica convinced herself that motherhood was all the stage she needed. But factory layoffs hit David hard. Bills multiplied while his drinking intensified. Their small house began to feel smaller as his voice grew louder and her voice grew quieter. Jessica found herself singing less and less, until one day she realized she'd been silent for so long she wasn't sure her voice would work anymore. The divorce left her with Emma, crushing debt, and the terrifying knowledge that at 34, she was starting completely over with fewer options than she'd had at 18. Music felt like a relic from someone else's life, something that belonged to a girl who no longer existed. Emma found the advertisement on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, printed on bright yellow paper and tucked between grocery store coupons. Cleveland's Voice, open auditions for all ages, grand prize $75,000 plus recording contract. Emma smoothed the wrinkled paper carefully across their coffee table, studying every word like it contained the secret to everything. $75,000 was more money than either of them could truly comprehend. That was 2 years of rent. That was Emma's future college fund. That was everything they'd ever needed, but couldn't reach. "Mom, you have to audition," Emma said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "You're better than everyone on TV." Jessica's laugh caught in her throat. "Sweetheart, Those shows are for people who've been training their whole lives, not for exhausted mothers who haven't sung anywhere except our shower. But Emma's faith was unbreakable. Mrs. Garcia says everyone has a superpower, and they're supposed to use it to help people. Your superpower is your voice, Mom. Maybe you're supposed to use it right now. Jessica stared at that yellow paper long after Emma had gone to bed. The audition was 8 weeks away. 8 weeks to remember how to be the girl who once believed her voice could carry her anywhere. 8 weeks to find courage she'd buried under years of just trying to survive each day. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was impossible. She couldn't afford to miss work for auditions. She didn't have professional clothes or vocal training, or any of the things that real competitors would have. She was 15 years older than most people who tried for these shows, with stretch marks and exhaustion lines that told the story of a life lived harder than she'd ever planned. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent, that sounded like the 17-year-old girl who used to fill auditoriums with something that made people believe in magic again. That voice whispered that maybe it wasn't too late to remember who she used to be before the world taught her to stay small. Jessica made her decision in the darkness of their bedroom, listening to Emma breathe peacefully in the bed they shared. She would audition, not because she expected to win, but because her daughter was watching, because Emma needed to see what it looked like when someone refused to let circumstances define their possibilities, because maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop surviving and start living. The next 8 weeks became a masterclass in finding yourself again. Jessica practiced in secret, standing in their bathroom at dawn with the shower running to mask the sound. She worked through breathing exercises she remembered from high school choir, stretched her voice carefully back toward ranges she hadn't attempted in years, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to let sound fill a space without apology. She chose her song during a 15-minute break at the diner, sitting in her car in the parking lot while rain drummed against the windshield. I Have Nothing by Whitney Houston, not because it was safe, but because it demanded everything she had to give. It was a song that had made her fall in love with the idea that voices could break people open and put them back together again, all in the space of 4 minutes. Emma noticed a change before anyone else could. Her mother seemed to carry herself differently, stand straighter, hum more often while folding their laundry. There was something in Jessica's eyes that reminded Emma of the photographs from her mom's high school yearbook, a light that had been missing for as long as Emma could remember. 4 weeks before the audition, Jessica used her employee discount to buy a navy blue dress that fit her properly and made her feel like someone who belonged under bright lights. 3 weeks before, she told Emma about her plan, watching her daughter's face explode into the kind of joy that makes everything else seem possible. 2 weeks before, she almost lost her nerve completely when she overheard teenagers at the grocery store discussing their own professional vocal coaches and years of competition experience. 1 week before the audition, Emma found her mother crying at their kitchen table, staring at the yellow advertisement like it had betrayed her. "I can't do this, baby girl. I'm not like those other people. I don't have what it takes anymore." Emma climbed into her mother's lap with the serious expression she wore when something really mattered. "Mom, remember when I was scared to read my story in front of the whole class? You told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do it anyway because it's important. This is important, Mom. You're important." The morning of the audition, Jessica's hand shook so badly she could barely button Emma's school uniform. She'd taken her first personal day in 3 years, losing wages they couldn't afford to lose. But Emma's excitement was impossible to ignore. The auditions were being held at the State Theater, a grand old venue that had hosted everyone from Ella Fitzgerald to Bruce Springsteen. As Jessica walked up those historic steps in her navy dress, carrying nothing but Emma's hand-drawn good luck card, she felt like she was crossing the border between 2 different lives. The waiting area was everything she'd feared. Aspiring performers young enough to be her children, many with professional headshots and perfectly styled hair, some with entire teams of coaches and managers. Jessica found a corner chair and tried to control her breathing while around her, voices warmed up with scales that sounded like they'd been perfected in expensive studios. Through the monitor, she watched contestant after contestant take the stage. A 19-year-old with operatic training, a college student who'd already opened for major artists, A 25-year-old influencer whose audition video already had millions of views online. With each flawless performance, Jessica felt herself disappearing. This had been a terrible mistake. She was a fraud pretending to belong in a world that had evolved far beyond her reach. She was gathering her purse to leave when a production assistant appeared beside her chair. "Jessica Thompson, you're next." The walk to center stage felt like traveling through time. Behind her was Jessica the survivor, the woman who counted every penny and worked until exhaustion, and had learned to make her dreams small enough to fit into the cracks between responsibilities. Ahead of her was something she'd almost forgotten how to be. Jessica the believer, the girl who once knew her voice could transform any room she entered. The stage lights made everything beyond the first few rows disappear into darkness. She could see 3 judges behind their table, one scrolling through his tablet, one organizing papers, one leaning back with a glazed expression of someone who'd been listening to hopeful voices all morning. "State your name and age for us, please." "Jessica Thompson. I'm 36. A pause. Whispered consultation. She caught fragments. "Bit mature for this?" And "Probably another soccer mom with delusions." The words landed like physical blows, confirming every insecurity that had been eating at her for weeks. Too old, too late, too ordinary. Jessica felt her carefully constructed confidence cracking like ice in spring. "And what song will you be performing today?" "I Have Nothing" by Whitney Houston. An audible sigh from the judge's table. One judge checked his watch. Jessica could practically see them writing her off before she'd sung a single note. She was just another middle-aged dreamer wasting time they didn't have, attempting a song they'd probably heard massacred by dozens of other hopefuls who confused good intentions with actual talent. Standing there under those merciless lights, Jessica felt smaller than she had in years. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Public humiliation, confirmation that her dreams had always been bigger than her abilities, proof that some opportunities only come once and hers had passed long ago. She thought about Emma, sitting in her 4th grade classroom at that exact moment, probably telling anyone who'd listened that her mom was going to be famous. She thought about the picture Emma had drawn and tucked into her purse, a stick-figure version of Jessica on a stage surrounded by hearts and stars. And then Jessica made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of apologizing and retreating, she closed her eyes and reached for the girl she used to be. The first note emerged from somewhere deeper than technique or training. It came from the place where all her dreams had been sleeping, waiting for permission to wake up. It wasn't the explosive opening that Whitney had made legendary. It was something more personal, more vulnerable, like a secret finally spoken aloud. The judge with the tablet looked up. The one with the papers stopped shuffling. The tired judge sat forward in her chair. Because what filled that theater wasn't just singing, it was storytelling. Jessica wasn't trying to copy Whitney Houston's legendary performance. She was using Whitney's words to tell her own story, letting every note carry the weight of dreams delayed, love lost and found again, and a mother's fierce determination to show her daughter that giving up wasn't an option. As the song climbed toward its soaring chorus, something magical happened. Jessica's voice began to fly, but not in the way of someone showing off their range. This was flight born of necessity, like someone who had forgotten they had wings until the moment they needed them to survive. All those years of keeping quiet, of making herself invisible, of choosing survival over self-expression. Everything poured out in a cascade of sound that seemed to change the very air in the room. The judges weren't just listening anymore. They were witnessing something that couldn't be manufactured or purchased or learned in any classroom. They were watching someone remember exactly who they were meant to be. Jessica sang about having nothing left to give, but somehow made it about finding everything she needed inside herself. She sang about love and loss, and somehow made it about never abandoning the dreams that live in your heart, even when life forces you to put them away. When she reached the final impossible high note, her voice didn't break with strain. It soared with a kind of raw power that only comes from someone who has genuinely lived every word they're singing. The last note dissolved into silence, so complete it felt sacred. Jessica opened her eyes to find all 3 judges staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to something approaching awe. In the wings, crew members who had heard hundreds of auditions stood frozen, several wiping tears they hadn't expected. Then the judge who had been checking his tablet, a man who had discovered platinum-selling artists and was notorious for his harsh critiques, did something Jessica would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. He stood up and began to clap. The other judges rose immediately, followed by every person who had witnessed what just happened. The applause wasn't polite appreciation. It was recognition, the kind that says we see exactly who you are and you're magnificent. But the real transformation was happening inside Jessica herself. Standing there in that spotlight, receiving acknowledgement she hadn't even known she was still hoping for, she felt something fundamental shift. Not because strangers approve of her, but because she had just proven to herself that the girl who once believed in the magic of her own voice hadn't died. She had just been waiting for permission to breathe again. Jessica's journey through the competition became the story that reminded everyone why they fell in love with music in the first place. Each week, she didn't just perform songs. She transformed them into chapters of her autobiography. Her version of Stronger by Kelly Clarkson became an anthem for every woman who had rebuilt herself from scratch. When she sang The Climb by Miley Cyrus, it turned into a love letter to single parents everywhere, fighting to show their children that mountains can be moved one stone at a time. But the real victory wasn't happening on television. It was happening at home, where Emma watched her mother remember how to take up space in the world. It was happening in their apartment, where music returned to fill rooms that had been silent too long. It was happening in Jessica's heart, where possibilities she thought were dead were stirring back to life like flowers after a long winter. Week after week, Jessica advanced not because she was the most technically perfect singer in the competition, but because she reminded everyone, judges, audience, and viewers at home, what authenticity sounds like. She proved that sometimes the most extraordinary performances come from the most ordinary places, that real talent isn't about perfection, but about truth. Jessica didn't win the competition. That honor went to a gifted young performer with conservatory training and a team of industry professionals behind her. But something more valuable happened during those final moments on stage, looking out at an audience giving her a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. The real prize was Emma, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her 10-year-old cheeks, watching her mother prove that it's never too late to remember who you really are. The real prize was a flood of messages from mothers across the country who had watched Jessica's journey and decided to dust off their own abandoned dreams. The real prize was a recording offer from an independent label that specialized in authentic voices telling real stories. Most importantly, the real prize was what happened inside Jessica herself. She had spent so many years just trying to survive each day that she'd forgotten she was also allowed to flourish. She'd become so focused on what she couldn't have that she'd overlooked the gifts that had always been hers to claim. 8 months after the audition that changed everything, Jessica released her debut single, a song she wrote herself about mothers and daughters and the dreams we carry like torches through the darkness. It didn't top the charts, but it did something better. It became truth wrapped in melody, hope set to harmony, proof that the most beautiful music often comes from the most broken places. Today, Jessica still works hard, but now she works as herself. She performs at small venues around Ohio, sharing her story through song with audiences who recognize their own struggles in her lyrics. She's not famous in the way she once imagined fame might look, but she's discovered something more valuable than celebrity. She's found her voice, both as a singer and as a human being. Emma keeps that original good luck drawing taped to their refrigerator, but now it's surrounded by real photographs from Jessica's performances, newspaper articles about the single mother who reminded an entire city that dreams don't expire, and a framed copy of Jessica's first royalty check. Modest but meaningful, proof that sometimes believing in yourself pays dividends that can't be calculated in dollars alone. Their morning routine has transformed completely. Where once there was rushing and stress and the weight of just making it through another day, now there's music playing while they eat breakfast together. Jessica sings openly now, without self-consciousness, the way she used it when Emma was a baby and didn't yet understand that some people's voices were supposed to stay hidden. Emma has started voice lessons herself, not because Jessica is pushing her toward performing, but because she's learned from her mother that finding your voice means more than music. It means refusing to let anyone convince you that you're smaller than you actually are. Jessica's story isn't really about singing, though music was a vehicle that carried her back to herself. It's about the dreams we bury under the weight of responsibility, the talents we silence because survival feels more urgent than self-expression, the way we teach ourselves to want less because wanting more seems too risky. It's about recognizing that our children are always watching, learning about possibility from our courage or our fear, deciding what they believe they can become based on what they see us choose for ourselves. Jessica's audition wasn't just about a competition. It was about showing Emma that mothers can be dreamers too, that it's never too late to reclaim who you really are, that sometimes the most revolutionary act is letting the world hear the song you've been hiding. Every time Jessica steps onto a stage now, she carries Emma's drawing in her pocket. Not for luck, but as a reminder that love and belief can resurrect dreams that seem beyond saving. She carries it as evidence that sometimes the most important audience isn't the one in front of you, but the 10-year-old girl in the front row of your life. Watch and see if you'll choose courage over comfort, possibility over safety, the spotlight or the shadows. Jessica's story continues to ripple outward in ways she never anticipated. Emma's teacher created a school program encouraging students to celebrate their family's hidden talents. Several single mothers in their neighborhood started meeting monthly to support each other's dreams alongside their responsibilities. Jessica's older sister, inspired by watching her siblings' transformation, went back to school at 45 to become a nurse. Jessica learned that courage spreads like wildfire, that when we give ourselves permission to be fully who we are, we accidentally give everyone around us permission to do the same. She discovered that her voice had always been powerful enough to change everything. She just needed to believe she deserved to use it. Now, when people asked Jessica about that day at the State Theater, about the moment when her life pivoted from endurance to possibility, she always gave the same answer. I didn't find my voice that day. My voice had been there all along, waiting for me to believe I was worth hearing. And Emma, now 11 and full of her own big dreams, loves to add her own wisdom. My mom taught me that the most beautiful songs don't come from people who never got hurt. They come from people who got hurt and decided to turn their scars into music. Because that's what Jessica Thompson discovered on a stage in Cleveland, in front of judges who almost missed witnessing something extraordinary. Sometimes our greatest gifts aren't the things we're born with, but the things we reclaim after we thought we'd lost them forever. Sometimes the most powerful performance isn't the one you deliver flawlessly, but the one you deliver fearlessly, with every imperfection telling the story of resilience. Every note proving that it's never too late to remember who you were always meant to become. Her journey reminds us that auditions aren't just about talent. They're about truth. And the truth is that every person listening to this story has music inside them that the world is waiting to hear. Even if they spent years convincing themselves they're too old, too tired, too ordinary, too late. Jessica Thompson walked onto that stage as a waitress who cleaned offices and stocked shelves to survive. She walked off as a woman who had reclaimed her right to dream, to sing, to occupy space in a world that taught her to stay invisible. That transformation, from overlooked to unforgettable, from silent to soaring, didn't happen because of magic. It happened because she decided that her voice, imperfect, untrained, seasoned by years of struggle, was still worth sharing. It happened because she chose to believe that Emma deserved to watch her mother refuse to let the world convince her that her dreams didn't matter. The most powerful truth of all is this. Jessica's story isn't extraordinary because she's special. Jessica's story is special because she's proof that all of us, every exhausted parent, every discouraged dreamer, every person who has trained themselves to expect less, still carry songs that are waiting for their moment to soar. We just have to remember that we're worth hearing. We just have to step into whatever light we can find and let our voices tell the truth of who we really are. Because sometimes the most beautiful auditions aren't about getting chosen by someone else. Sometimes they're about finally choosing yourself. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter. And it's never, ever too late to step onto the stage of your own life and show the world a song that's been waiting in your heart all along.